Hi, and welcome to Hull & Hull TV. I'm Suzana Popovic-Montag, the managing partner of Hull & Hull, a firm that practices exclusively in estate, trust, and capacity litigation. Here at Hull & Hull TV, we explore estate and planning issues as they may affect you. We're very pleased to be able to continue today with part 2 of our series where we've got the Honourable Roy McMurtry with us. Mr. McMurtry is the former Chief Justice of Ontario, the High Commissioner to Great Britain, Attorney General for Ontario, a gentleman who was deeply involved in the repatriation of the Canadian Constitution and in the creation of our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
And welcome, Ian. Ian is the co-founding partner of Hull & Hull, and we're very pleased to have both of these gentlemen join us here today. Chief, could you share some of your highlights as High Commissioner to Great Britain with us?
Well, certainly there are many highlights. I should explain that the term High Commissioner was created for independent former colonies of Britain that had become independent, because it's really the same job as an ambassador, exactly the same responsibilities. But to me, it was a good fortune to be Canada's High Commissioner, ambassador in London when Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister, and she was a fascinating person, a very tough person in some respects, but she also could be very, very helpful in other respects. But we were in a significant dispute with the UK over apartheid in South Africa, and Canada played a leading role, and Margaret Thatcher was very cautious. I think she really believed that there couldn't be a democratic government in South Africa without a major and bloody civil war. And if it hadn't been for Nelson Mandela, she might have been quite right, and Ronald Reagan felt the same way. But she was a very interesting person to deal with, and really, when you look at British society, where there still is more of a glass ceiling for women than there is in North America, Western Europe, I mean, her accomplishments were really quite incredible, and to think that when I think back on somebody becoming a leader of the Conservative Party in 1975, and you've never heard a single female name mentioned since then as a potential leader of a major party. So Margaret made life interesting. But I had a great staff. I had 340 people and a number of programs to administer, everything from, of course, commercial being the biggest one, and trade and whatnot. But it was quite an adventure, and to be able to invite the Queen for dinner and spend time with her at Windsor Castle, it's not something I'd want to do indefinitely, but it was certainly an adventure, but I certainly have no regrets in becoming a judge, and I enjoyed that responsibility, and I certainly feel very fortunate to be able to continue in the practice of law after my retirement, and particularly to be with Hull & Hull, where I am today, and a lot of my early work as law reform work as Attorney General had to do with estates, as you know, and family law reform, and so I'm digging into the Hull and Hull textbooks to sort of get caught up.
Well, Chief, you personally brought forward, as the Attorney General at the time and the Solicitor General, a tremendous amount of legislation, one of the most important pieces of legislation that actually, in fact, impacts upon our practice. And in total, I think about 60 new pieces of legislation were introduced during your tenure?
Well, 60 that had law reform. And my policy branch gave me a nice bound copy of those 60 pieces of legislation, and I had a lot of very capable people as advisors, and we also had a law reform commission that had done a lot of good work in Ontario, and that was certainly an asset, whereas the federal government have abolished the Federal Law Reform Commission. The province abolished it and then brought it back under a different sort of structure. But in any event, they were most interesting days.
So, Chief, the favorite part of any book for me is the pictures. And so I'm enjoying some of the photos from that you've chosen to put in your book. And there's a series of photos dealing with the Constitution and the repatriation of the Constitution and the time that you spent in all of your efforts, both at Ottawa but before in the build-up to it. There is, of course, to many of us, the famous kitchen meeting that occurred that the folklore is that saved the Constitution repatriation. And so we just thought if we could just hear from you about a little bit about what was happening at that point in the negotiations, and why was there a kitchen meeting, and why did you and Roy Romanoff and Jean Chrétien have to get into and I believe it was the kitchen at the Chateau Laurier, was it, in Ottawa?
No, it was the convention center, meeting center across the road.
Okay. So you tell us which
the old
kitchen.
railway station.
Oh, great. We'd like to hear about that kitchen meeting.
Yes, well, the kitchen meeting where we made some notes as to what we thought would be saleable to most of the premiers, except René Lévesque, really was the final act of a series of meetings between Roy Romanoff and Jean Chrétien and myself. And after the whole thing was over and we reached an agreement, the thing that I often reflect on, or the aspect I often reflect on, is that the three of us were very good friends. We worked together closely. And yet at the same time, we represented three different political parties, three different regions of the country, and three different linguistic and cultural heritages. And I mention that because that would never happen today. You'd never have that cooperation and between the opposition parties. But we never thought about it. But it was just something that dawned on us. But we knew there were two or three key issues. And we knew that a time had come where we had to sort of move ahead or the whole thing was going to end. Mr. Trudeau, the Prime Minister, he seemed to have be focusing on the idea of having national referendums with respect to the amending formula and the Charter of Rights, which were the two most contentious issues. And the reason we had the BNA Act, it's an act of British Parliament since 1867, was that Canada in 1867 did not become an independent nation. And most people don't reflect on that fact. We really were a glorified colony with substantial responsibility for our internal affairs. But the British government were in charge of our international relations. And so we didn't have an amending formula in the original British North America Act, because it was just assumed that would be up to the British government at a time when they thought it was appropriate. And so we'd been arguing over this, as it turned out, for more than 50 years. without a solution. It gets some of it is a little complicated. But the important thing was that we realized, and time does not allow me to go through why we thought this was the moment. And that was on a Wednesday afternoon. And Prime Minister Trudeau was talking about national referendums to determine the entrenchment of the Charter rights and the amending formula. And Levesque enthusiastically agreed, not realizing that all the other provincial premiers were totally hostile to the idea, because it would have allowed the federal government to ignore the wishes of the provincial governments and just go directly to their electorate. And so when this came up, this clearly was a time for to move ahead. And so basically we gathered in the kitchen, just convenient nearby, a little privacy, and we wrote down what we thought, in a few sentences, what we thought would accomplish an agreement. And I think that piece of paper is in the Canadian archives and at the present time. But the fact that we were able to propose a compromise, which included a notwithstanding clause, and again, I don't want to get too technical because I've already been a little long-winded.
No.
But it sort of carried the day, and of course there were key actors amongst the provincial premiers, particularly Bill Davis, of course, and Peter Lougheed and Alan Blakeney. But in any event, it worked, and it's certainly something that a memory that I will always treasure.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. That brings us to the end of the second part of our series. We're very, very pleased to have had you join us today, Chief, and we thank you very much for your time, for your wonderful recollections and your amazing history.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
And thank you,
for
Ian,
your invitation.
To learn more about the remarkable story behind the remarkable man, I refer you to the Memoirs and Reflections, with a lovely shot of our chief on the front, although for some reason he seems to prefer the picture on the back. Thank you very much. And thank you for watching Hull and Hull TV.